Last man in line. No radio, no time. He broke formation, alone against 20 enemy fighters, kept firing as his own cockpit burned around him. And in 6 blazing minutes over Aachen, earned one of America's highest honors for valor. Then spent the next 80 years, right up until he was still walking that same runway.
Welcome back to the war trench.
The pilot who never met his father, but became him September 16, 1944, somewhere in the sky above Aachen, Germany, a 22-year-old lieutenant is flying tail-end position in a squadron of P-38 Lightnings, the last man in line, the one whose job is simply to watch everyone else's back. Then he sees them, a wall of enemy fighters closing fast. About to fall on his squadron from above and behind, he tries the radio, nothing, no way to warn his leader. So he does the only thing left to do. He peels off, alone, and flies straight at them. 6 minutes later, his cockpit is on fire. His face, his neck, his hands are burning. He has shot down 2 enemy aircraft. And he is about to become one of the most decorated fighter pilots of the Second World War. His name is Jim Kunkle. And this is a story about a battle that lasted 6 minutes and a debt that took a lifetime to understand. Because 12 years before that morning over Aachen, Jim Kunkle stood at his father's grave. He was 9 years old. And the man in the ground beside him had spent his whole life wanting to do exactly what his son would one day do: fly. He never got the chance. To understand Jim Kunkle, you have to start with a man most people have never heard of: his father. The elder Kunkle came of age during the First World War, in an era when aviation was still a kind of magic trick, when the idea of a machine carrying a man into the sky was, for most people on Earth, still brand new. Like so many young men of his generation, he was pulled toward it. He wanted to fly. He never got that chance. Instead, he came home from the war carrying injuries from a wartime accident, wounds that would slowly catch up with him over the following decade. He settled instead into an ordinary life in Pennsylvania, working in the post-World War I steel industry. And it was there, on the road calling on customers, that he passed something down to his only child: not a cockpit, not a pilot's license, but a fascination. A hunger for the sky that had nowhere else to go, so he poured it into his son instead. Jim Kunkle would later describe it simply: his father never really got the chance to fly, but he planted an interest in aviation in his son before Jim could even remember it happening. In 1932, the wounds finally caught up with him. Jim Kunkle's father died, a casualty of the war after all, just delayed by 10 years. Jim was 9 years old, an only child. And now, fatherless, there is a particular kind of grief that doesn't announce itself right away. A boy doesn't understand at 9 that he has just inherited something, not property, not money, a longing. His father's unlived life had just become his to live, whether he knew it yet or not. After his father's death, Jim and his mother left Pennsylvania behind and moved to Beverly Hills, California. The timing could not have been more perfect or more cruel in its perfection. This was the golden age of American aviation. California was its beating heart, a place where Hollywood glamour and aeronautical ambition were tangled together in the same sunny air. Jim's mother would drive him out to Grand Central Air Terminal in Glendale in those days, the airport for all of Los Angeles. And there, a boy with no father and an inherited obsession found something to do with both. He worked around the airfield, washed airplanes, ran errands, did whatever needed doing. His pay, most days, wasn't money at all. It was whatever was left over once someone could scrape together enough gasoline money. And when there was enough, Jim got something better than a paycheck: 10 or 20 minutes in the air. Sometimes, if the pilot was generous, a few minutes with his own hands on the controls. Think about that. A fatherless boy, quite literally trading his labor for scraps of the sky, earning, in small increments, the one thing his father had wanted and never received. By 16, when World War II broke out in 1939, Kunkle wanted nothing more than to get into a cockpit and be ready. He graduated from Beverly Hills High School that same year and joined the California Air National Guard, only to be discharged almost immediately. He was underage. The Guard had federalized, tightened its rules, and found out the truth: Jim Kunkle was still a teenager pretending at a man's war. So he waited. He enrolled at Cumnock College in Los Angeles. He took a job at Lockheed's night facility, assembling wing sections for a plane he could not yet imagine he'd one day fly in combat, the P-38 Lightning. And then, on a Sunday morning in December 1941, while Kunkle was out horseback riding, a friend rode up with news: Pearl Harbor had been attacked. The wait was over. Every boy in the late 1930s wanted to be a P-38 Lightning pilot. Kunkle would say decades later, and he meant it plainly, this wasn't hindsight talking, it was memory. The P-38 was unlike anything else in the sky. Twin-engine, twin-boomed, sleek and silver, radical in its silhouette. To a generation of boys who grew up drawing airplanes in the margins of their schoolwork, it looked like the future. When the Army lowered its age restrictions after Pearl Harbor, Kunkle finally qualified. He entered flight training, was assigned to Class 44A, and trained at Williams Field in Arizona. In January 1944, he received his pilot's wings and his commission as a second lieutenant. He was shipped to England in May of 1944 and joined the 401st Fighter Squadron, 370th Fighter Group, flying P-38s out of Andover. Weeks later, the world would change. On June 6, 1944, D-Day Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, and Kunkle's squadron was airborne right behind them. His first combat mission came just after the invasion, an armed reconnaissance flight across the English Channel, hunting German trains, vehicles, and airfields below. His unit would go on to fly out of a hastily built airstrip only a few miles from Omaha Beach, close enough that you could still see the invasion fleet from the cockpit. Roughly a third of his missions, by his own recollection, supported General George Patton's advancing Third Army. Day after day, he flew low over a continent tearing itself apart, doing the unglamorous. Dangerous work of ground attack trains, armor, troop columns, anything on the move. He was, in every sense, living the dream his father never got to have. He had no idea yet how expensive that dream was about to become. By September of 1944, the front had moved into Germany itself, toward the city of Aachen. And on the 16th of that month, Kunkle's combat career would reach its defining moment and very nearly its end. He was flying as rear guard for his squadron on an armed reconnaissance mission. It's a position that exists for exactly one reason: to see danger coming before anyone else does. And that day, Kunkle saw it: a vastly superior force of enemy aircraft, positioning to ambush his squadron from above and behind, completely unnoticed by anyone else in formation. He tried his radio. He could not reach his flight leader. There was no time to circle back, no time to signal, no time to do this by the book. So Kunkle did something the book doesn't really have a procedure for. He broke formation alone and flew directly into the attack. His official Distinguished Service Cross citation lays out what happened next in language that still carries weight 8 decades later. Diving into the enemy formation, he immediately destroyed one aircraft. But in doing so, he'd placed himself exactly where a lone fighter should never be exposed, from above and behind to the rest of the enemy force. They found him. Enemy fire tore into his P-38. His plane caught fire. The flames burned his face, his neck, his hands, and he kept fighting. According to his citation, despite the burning aircraft and continued enemy gunfire, Kunkle pressed his attack and shot down a second enemy plane, only breaking off when his left fuel tank finally exploded, forcing him to bail out. By his own estimate, the entire engagement from the moment he spotted the ambush to the moment he pulled his ripcord lasted about 6 minutes. 360 seconds. That's what it took to earn America's second highest award for combat valor, one rank below the Medal of Honor. 360 seconds that would define the rest of a man's life. Kunkle deliberately waited before pulling his parachute as long as he dared, knowing that a slower falling target hanging in the open sky was an easy one for enemy fighters below to finish off. When the chute finally opened and he came down, he landed hard in a courtyard tangled in a tree beside a red brick building. His hands were burned badly. His back was broken in the fall. And in that disoriented moment, not knowing if he'd landed in friendly or enemy territory, he reached for his sidearm, a Port 45 caliber M1911 pistol, and tried to cock it. He dropped it. As it turned out, the U.S. Army was in the process of retaking Aachen at that very moment. Kunkle had come down, injured and half-blind with pain, into ground that was already turning back toward the Allies. He was found, treated, and eventually sent to a hospital in England. There, in one of those strange, quiet coincidences war seems to produce, he crossed paths with an infantryman named Leonard Scott, a soldier who, unbeknownst to Kunkle, had witnessed his entire 6-minute battle from the ground, start to finish. Scott himself was a decorated combat veteran of North Africa and Sicily. The two men stayed together for weeks as they made their way out of Paris and into recovery, a fighter pilot and an infantryman, each carrying a version of the same war in their bodies. In February 1945 in Paris, General Carl Toohey Spots, the American air commander in Europe, personally pinned the Distinguished Service Cross on Jim Kunkle's chest. He would also receive the Purple Heart and later France's own Legion of Honor. Doctors told him something else too, that he would never fly again. Jim Kunkle did not agree. In that era, medical records traveled with an officer on paper, from post to post. So when Kunkle was transferred, he simply reached into his own file and removed the pages that documented his wounds, the ones that would have grounded him for good. By the time he reported for his next assignment, as an engineer and eventually a test pilot in Portland, Oregon, there was nothing in his record to suggest he was anything other than fully fit for flight. The boy who once traded gasoline money for 10 minutes in the air had just talked his way back into the sky by editing his own paperwork. Kunkle left the Air Force in 1948, but he never really left aviation. He built and ran fixed-base aviation operations across California for the rest of his working life, most recently at the Santa Maria Airport. 3 generations of the Kunkle family would go on to work in aviation. His son ran a fixed-base operation of his own. His grandson took to the skies, too. In recognition of that legacy, the airport in Santa Ynez, California was renamed Kunkle Field, its logo, fittingly a silhouette of a P-38. In 2009, decades after that burning cockpit over Aachen, Jim Kunkle stood in France again, this time at a ceremony marking the 65th anniversary of D-Day, where he personally met President Barack Obama. He kept flying long after most men his age had stopped driving. Into his hundreds, he still owned several aircraft and kept them flight-ready in his own hangar, a Champ, a pair of Cessnas. A scaled-down replica biplane he only flew on warmer days because, as he put it, the open cockpit got colder than heck in winter. His wife, Ruth, was the one authority who could ground him. She wouldn't let him fly solo anymore, though she couldn't keep him out of the cockpit altogether. Every day, well into his hundreds, he walked the length of a runway, 1.5 miles, just to maintain the same lean build he'd had as a 22-year-old lieutenant climbing into a P-38 over the Normandy beaches. He turned 100 years old in October of 2022 at the Central Coast Airfest in Santa Maria, a celebration built, in part, around his own life. The following spring, the Nebraska Air National Guard flew him out on an honorary refueling mission aboard a KC-135 Stratotanker, formally recalling him to duty for a single day and presenting him with a flight suit to wear for the occasion. He was, by then, a member of the Legion of Valor of the United States. His awards: the Distinguished Service Cross, the Purple Heart. The French Legion of Honor, the Croix de Guerre, lined the wall of his hangar in Santa Ynez, alongside the framed citation that describes 6 minutes over Aachen in the driest, most official language imaginable, still somehow unable to contain what actually happened in that sky. There's a particular kind of American story that doesn't get told often enough, not the story of a hero who set out to be one, but the story of a debt quietly paid across a generation. Jim Kunkle's father wanted to fly in a war that ended before he ever got a chance to try. He came home wounded instead, lived a decade in the shadow of that war, and died leaving behind a 9-year-old son and an unfinished dream, That son didn't inherit money. He didn't inherit a name people would recognize on sight. He inherited a longing for the sky, and he spent the rest of his life closing the distance between his father's grounded life and his own. He washed airplanes for spare change. He edited his own medical file to get back in a cockpit doctors said he'd never fly again. He broke formation alone against 20 enemy aircraft because there was no time left to do anything else. And he kept flying for the better part of a century afterward, walking a runway well into his hundreds, as if some part of him was still trying to earn back those 10-minute flights from Grand Central Air Terminal. Jim Kunkle never met the man who gave him that hunger for flight, but somewhere over Aachen, Germany, on September 16, 1944, for 6 burning minutes, he became him.